Hey everyone, welcome. Fridays with Freddie. Fred, great to have you here. Today we're tackling a topic that kind of has bubbled up for you based on some conversations recently on this idea of constraints. Set it up for us and then let's dive right into it.
Yeah, so we're talking a lot about innovation, right? I mean, we've spoken about it on this podcast. We had some beehive. Actually, we had a great beehive last week that I encourage people to listen to. That was about innovation. We had two great guests, and the question was: does innovation come from the top, or does it come from the bottom?
Hmm.
Which kind of spurred me into some reflection, if you want to call it, and also based on some conversations I've had with people over the last few weeks to say, "Hey, Fred, that all sounds great, but I'm really busy and I don't
Yeah.
have enough staff. And I don't, and I'm not sure if my boss is going to buy into this or
And we have a
if,
hiring freeze.
right, exactly. Yeah. So, so I wanted to talk about innovation, but really how constraints, right, which we all deal with how that can actually be a very powerful motivator and enabler of finding solutions outside of uh, the normal way of doing things, right? We call that,
Okay.
we call that, your pathway. One of the first things that you do when you start in a new organization is a process of acculturation, which is basically you're being onboarded onto, hey, Fred, hey, Joe, this is how things work at this organization, right? You
Mhm.
start to figure out who to talk to, who not to talk to, who can help you, who can enable you, what's appropriate, what's not. But that immediately puts in certain guardrails, if you want to call it, or certain pathways that we're going to do things this way. We have been doing things this way, and it's very hard to break out of that. So I'm going to recommend a book. Let me hold it up for you. This book really changed the approach that I've taken. This is called A Beautiful Constraints.
Huh.
We'll put the link in. Older book, 2015, which in the age of the internet, of course, is ancient,
Yeah.
but it's been fairly influential in the way I approach constraints and how I look at constraints. And maybe I could give an example in the form of a story,
Okay.
which is in the book, and I think it's very enlightening. So everybody's heard of the Le Mans race, right? Which is the
Yeah.
which is the famous race with
24 hours.
24 hours, particular raceway, and the car needs to be on the track for 24 hours. This is it's a very prestigious race. The who's who is there. So Audi asked themselves a question. And by the way, Audi was very successful. They were thinking, hey, look, we're hitting the limits of what we can do. So they asked themselves a question. And the question was, how can we win Le Mans if we cannot go any faster than anyone else?
Hmm.
Right? And that's what we call a propelling question. So what we're doing is we're taking an ambition, which is, hey, how do I win this race? But I can't go any faster, right? Or you could turn around. You could say, how do I increase enrollment in a time when demographics?
Cliff.
Uh,
Yeah.
but with Audi, so what Audi did by asking that question is, okay, if I can't go any faster, then what else can I do? So then they figured out, I said, well, one of the things we need to do is we need to do pit stops, right? Because we run out of gas, we need to do maintenance, etc. So really, if we could find a way to save gas, then we have fewer pit stops. So therefore, we can run more laps.
Got it.
Now, Audi was very famous at the time already of pioneering diesel engines. So they built a brand new diesel engine made for this particular race car, and lo and behold, it worked. Right? They won Le Mans for the next 3 years again. But the point is this: it's by looking outside of your pathways, the regular way of doing things, and just saying, okay, I have a constraint, but I'm not going to let that constraint constrain me. No pun intended.
So you're saying the constraint, you have to accept it. You can't hide it,
Right.
but you can't also fall for it. You have to recognize the constraint and say, in light of this constraint, let's call that the table stake. The constraint is the constraint. How do I still solve for my
Right.
bigger goal, which is in this case to win Le Mans? In the example you gave, it's to grow enrollment or maybe to serve students better or whatever it may be.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and that's why the book is called A Beautiful Constraint, because what it's saying is like, hey, look, constraints that's just the way we do business today. Right? You're
Okay.
not going to work in any organization where you're fully staffed, you're fully funded, everything is great, your colleagues are great, you have the right skills. There's always going to be constraint. It's how you deal with that constraint that's important. Now, what this book argues, and I would say I would agree with, because it gives agency to an individual, which is, first of all, it says, hey, what's your mindset around the constraints, right? So what the
Mm.
book says is, look, you can either be a victim, right? It's like, well, this is the way it is. This is the
Yeah.
way it's always been.
And we hear that a lot, right?
Right? We hear it a lot. You could be a neutralizer, which is like, you know what? Yes, there's a constraint, but as long as I do my job, I'm good because I can't control the rest. Or you could
Mm.
be a transformer, which is like what Audi was saying, right? What Audi was saying, I have this constraint, but okay, realizing that, what can I do? Right? So it's a very powerful agency motivator, if you want to put it that way.
So, Fred, as you're talking, given the constraint in higher ed, whether it's in the IT department or functional departments, it's across the board. I'm maxed out. My people are maxed out. We can't hire more people, but there's so much work to be done, right? That's the reality.
Yep.
Embrace that, like you're saying, as the beautiful constraint, and then say, given that reality, how do we still get the very, very important missional stuff done, right? And so this goes back to some of the conversations we've been having, is maybe that's what's going to trigger the real innovation around AI and these emerging technologies, and embracing them, because you've embraced the real constraint, recognizing that there's no more hours in the day and there's no more work you can give your people. Now maybe you could start asking the question, well, what work are we giving the people?
Right.
And is it the most meaningful work we're giving them? Or is it based on old policies, old procedures, old structures? This is how we've always done it. Susie has always used a spreadsheet to plan our calendar and our schedule, so she will always use a spreadsheet. Or could this trigger people going, why does Susie do that anymore? Isn't there technology that can allow Susie to do it better? Where could AI play into Susie's job and Jim's job and Bill's job and our department's job and our institution's job, right? That's kind of what was in my mind as you're describing the Audi situation, and I'm applying it to higher ed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's only one layer. The beauty of forcing yourself to think outside of, a constraints mindset, or basically a scarcity mindset, because that's really what it is, right? You're focusing on what I don't have.
Right.
Looking at an abundance mindset, look, I don't mean for this to be a Tony Robbins moment, but it really is that simple sometimes. It's like, what can you do, right? So, and if you have an abundance mindset within the institution, and you're thinking about your own team, maybe you should start thinking about, but are there other people within the organization that I could form alliances with, that we could do, that we could co-create with, that we can, I'll give you an example. When I was working for Columbia University, there was a central IT, but every major school had their own IT as well, right? Well, if you combine the two, you get a very large and very capable team. Focusing on co-creating issues, working together on projects, immediately becomes a force multiplier, if you want to call it that.
And another scenario, that would be one great exercise people could be doing. But let's say they're solo campus, single, small, whatever it may be. Just doing the exercise of saying, in Susie's work and John's work and in our department's work, or institutionally, how much work does a person do every day that's just structured, repetitive, repeatable, programmable, so to speak? Matt and Alex talks about this all the time, the structured versus the unstructured. Do an audit of how much structured work your people are doing, folding transcripts and mailing out things. And that's all automatable, right?
Right.
And can we put on the lens of what of that can go to technology to then free up bandwidth to do the meaningful, high impact work we need to do? Because to your point, we cannot win the race if we keep saying we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time in the day, and there's too many projects to execute on, right? That's just a defeatist mindset that's kind of plaguing higher ed at this point.
Yeah, look, I give you a great example. Remember when back in the day when Yahoo was a thing, and then Google came out?
Yeah.
And one of the things that was different about Google, there was this stark page with the search bar, right? And a lot of people
not all the fancy banners, right?
But a lot of people thought that was because it was some kind of really really deep design Zen philosophy. But it was the limitation of the coding skills of, and I don't know who it was, Sergey Brin or Larry Page, but that was one of the reasons. Like, you know what, let's keep it simple.
I'm not a designer,
right? I'm not a designer. So they took. There's a perfect example of how a constraint became a strength, right? So opening up a completely new pathway.
So yeah, Matt, here's what I would say, Fred, as we close up this session, because I think we've given people some good fodder to think about, and I would certainly encourage them to get some time with us to unpack this for their department or their school's level, because there's so much more to say about it. But Look, I don't come from higher ed. I come from outside, right, from the entrepreneurial space. And every time I see a higher ed financial statement, and I see that 80%, typically 70 to 80% of all incoming revenue goes to people, staff, right,
Yep.
faculty and staff. That's a staggering number. It's unheard of anywhere else on the planet. The idea that we don't have enough people is ridiculous. So, not to be insulting, but to say, look, that's a false constraint. You just have really good people doing horrible work. That's the problem. And administrators need to do what you're just saying and say, we got to take a clean slate to this and say, how do we get our people doing meaningful work? How do we get technology doing what it's supposed to do so that we can serve? Because 80% of your revenue going to people means you have an army. No matter what your school size is, you have an army relative to the audience you serve, and you should be able to serve them incredibly well. Closing
Yeah.
thoughts from you?
Yeah, and I would, yeah, I fully agree with that. And some of the constraints there have more to do with organizational design, with
Yes,
job
100%.
with the description with job descriptions, what you're allowed to do, where the budget is allocated. But these are all under
But
an
we got to take
institution's
these
control.
things on, right? As part of this constraint solution. How do we win when we can't go any faster?
That's right.
I love
Yeah.
that picture you've given us.
Yeah. Yeah. And the final thought I would say, I know there's people that at this moment looking at this, that are screaming at the monitors that you don't
Yeah,
understand. Listen, we get it. But
we
what
get it.
I guess what I'm saying is, regardless of your situation, valid or no, you have to start somewhere, and having the right mental frameworks or the mental tools to start with. How do I deal with the constraints in my environment and move forward? I think it's a very important first step.
Yeah, you said, it's okay for people to get upset at us as long as they then end up having a conversation, right? Complain about us in a staff
Yes,
meeting and get a conversation going.
right,
We would much rather you do that than just assume that it's got to be status quo for the next 5 years and higher ed will remain relevant in 5. It just won't be. All
right.
right, so the beautiful constraint, I will grab that link from you, Fred. If you can send it to me, I'll post it in the link along with this video. Grab a copy of the book or read a preview of it,
Yeah,
and we'll see you all next time.
perfect.